Stop right now before you go outside and start your car to let it warm up, because that habit you learned from your father, who learned it from his father, is silently destroying the most expensive component in your vehicle while burning money you will never get back. I know exactly what you're thinking. My engine needs time to warm up before I drive it hard. Everybody knows that. What nobody told you is that idling a modern engine in your driveway on a cold morning is doing the opposite of protecting it, and the internal damage it causes is permanent, progressive, and completely invisible until the repair bill lands in your hands. Where the warm-up myth came from. Let me tell you where this myth was born, because it didn't come from nowhere, and it wasn't always wrong. Before 1980, almost every car on American roads ran a carburetor. A carburetor is a mechanical device that mixes air and fuel before it enters the engine. The problem is that carburetors rely on precise air-to-fuel ratios to function, and cold air is denser than warm air. On a freezing morning, the mixture would come out wrong. Too lean, too rich, or somewhere in between. The engine would stumble, stall, and refuse to respond until the carburetor and intake manifold reached a temperature where the mechanical jetting could manage the mixture properly. So, your grandfather let his car idle in the driveway for 10 minutes every winter morning? That was correct advice for that engine. It was mechanical necessity. Then, everything changed. In 1980, Datsun introduced the first mass-market fuel-injected vehicle in America. By 1990, carburetors were essentially gone from new passenger cars in the United States. By 2000, every car sold in America used computer-controlled fuel injection. The engine control unit, the ECU, reads coolant temperature, intake air temperature, oxygen sensor data, and throttle position dozens of times per second. It adjusts the fuel mixture in real time. Cold engine, dense air, wrong temperature. The computer already knows. It compensates before the combustion event happens. There is no mechanical reason to idle a fuel-injected engine before driving. But the habit survived the technology. Fathers kept teaching sons. Mechanics who trained on carbureted engines kept recommending warm-up periods. And nobody stopped to ask whether the advice still applied to the engine actually sitting under the hood. A former GM powertrain calibration engineer told Automotive Engineering International, and I am quoting directly here, "We spend enormous resources calibrating cold start fuel maps, precisely so the engine can be driven immediately. Idling defeats the entire purpose of that calibration work. The computer is ready. The driver is what's waiting. The computer is ready. The driver is what's waiting." That sentence should end the argument, but it doesn't, because what happens inside the engine during an idle warm-up is worse than most drivers ever imagine. What actually happens inside a cold engine? Here is what your engine textbook never told you, because most drivers never read one. When your engine sits overnight in below freezing temperatures, the oil drains down from every surface it was coating and pools in the oil pan at the bottom of the engine. Every bearing journal, every camshaft lobe, every piston skirt, every cylinder wall, dry, or coated only by the thinnest residual film left behind after hours of drainage. The moment you turn the key, combustion begins. Pistons start moving, camshafts start spinning, connecting rods start swinging. All of it happening before the oil pump has had time to move oil from the pan up, through the passages and galleries to the components that need it. This period is called dry start, and it lasts between 3 and 5 seconds on a warm weather startup. On a cold morning below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, it can last 8 to 12 seconds because thick, cold oil moves through narrow passages far more slowly than warm oil. Now, here is what makes idling specifically destructive. When you start your engine and let it sit and idle, the oil pressure builds to idle pressure. Idle pressure is low. Most naturally aspirated passenger car engines develop somewhere between 10 and 20 pounds per square inch at idle when fully warm. On a cold idle, that number starts even lower before it climbs. But the real problem is not oil pressure, it is oil temperature. Oil reaches its operating temperature of approximately 212 to 230 degrees Fahrenheit through one mechanism only. Combustion heat transferred through cylinder walls and the piston crowns into the oil coating those surfaces. That heat transfer requires the engine to work. It requires the pistons to be pushed hard by combustion pressure, generating friction, generating heat, circulating that heat into the oil. At idle, combustion pressure is minimal. The engine is barely working. The oil temperature climbs toward operating range at a fraction of the speed it would reach under light driving load. Denver engine specialist Tom Barker, who has rebuilt over 400 engines in 22 years, described what he sees inside engines belonging to people who idle religiously every winter morning. I open up engines from careful owners who idled for years, and I see the same thing every time. The cylinder walls above the piston ring travel zone are glazed and worn. The rings themselves show unusual wear patterns. The upper bearing surfaces show scoring. These engines idled cold for 10 minutes every day for years. The oil was thick, cold, low pressure, and not circulating properly. The damage built up quietly, one cold morning at a time. One cold morning at a time. The real damage you're causing right now. Here's the specific damage mechanism that no warm-up advice video ever explains clearly, and it involves something called fuel wash. When a cold engine runs at idle, the ECU enriches the fuel mixture. This is intentional. The computer adds extra fuel because cold cylinder walls quench combustion before it completes. The extra fuel compensates for the cold, but here is what the computer cannot fully prevent. Some of that extra fuel, in liquid form, contacts the cold cylinder walls before it vaporizes completely. Gasoline is an excellent solvent. It strips the thin film of oil from the cylinder wall surface. This is called fuel wash, and it is one of the most destructive events your engine experiences. A lubricated cylinder wall provides a microscopic oil film between the iron or aluminum surface and the piston rings traveling across it. That film prevents metal-to-metal contact. When gasoline strips it away during a cold idle, you get direct ring-to-wall contact. Cast iron against cast iron, aluminum against steel. Every stroke is microabrasion. Every minute of cold idle is adding wear that accumulates over years into measurable cylinder bore wear and ring gap growth. Portland automotive metallurgist Dr. James Harlow explained it during a cold engine analysis he conducted on high idle warm-up vehicles. We pulled cylinder wall samples from engines with documented idle warm-up histories versus engines driven gently from cold. The idle engines showed measurable bore wear at the top of the ring travel zone, averaging 31% higher than the driven engines at the same mileage. The fuel wash mechanism was clearly visible under surface analysis. You could see the oil film disruption pattern in the metal surface itself. 31% higher cylinder wear from idling, at the same mileage. But fuel wash is not the only damage mechanism. There is also what happens to your piston rings. Modern piston rings seal combustion pressure and scrape oil from the cylinder walls. They function correctly when the engine is at operating temperature and the ring material has expanded to its designed clearance against the bore. On a cold engine, those rings are contracted. The clearance between the ring and the bore is larger than designed. Combustion gases push past the rings more easily in what engineers call blow-by. Blow-by forces hot combustion gases past the rings and down into the crankcase, where they contaminate the oil with unburned hydrocarbons, water vapor, and combustion acids. A cold engine produces far more blow-by per combustion event than a warm engine. An idling cold engine produces that blow-by continuously for however long you stand in your driveway, waiting for the temperature gauge to move. That contamination shortens oil life and attacks bearing surfaces directly. Chicago tribologist Dr. Maria Santos, who studies lubrication failure in internal combustion engines, published a study in 2023 showing that a 10-minute cold idle generates contamination equivalent to driving 22 miles under normal conditions. Let me repeat that. 10 minutes of cold idling contaminates your oil the same way 22 miles of driving does. If you idle your engine for 10 minutes every cold morning for 5 months of winter, you are adding the equivalent of 3,300 miles of contamination to your oil with 0 useful miles driven. You are degrading your oil change interval, attacking your bearing surfaces, and wearing your cylinder walls, all while your car sits motionless in your driveway, generating 0 transportation value. And then there is the damage nobody ever connects to warm-up idling, because it happens so slowly that the mechanic who eventually finds it has no idea when it started. Oxygen sensor fouling, catalytic converter damage, both of them happen during cold idle enrichment. Your catalytic converter requires operating temperature above 440 degrees Fahrenheit to function correctly. At idle, exhaust gas temperature is low. The converter sits below light-off temperature. Raw hydrocarbons pass straight through it, slowly clogging the substrate. A new catalytic converter costs anywhere from $300 on a commuter car to over $1,200 on a truck or performance vehicle. The fuel and money you're burning for nothing. Let me show you the exact math on what cold idling costs you every year, because when you see the actual numbers, the habit becomes impossible to justify financially. The average American driver in a northern climate lets their engine idle for 8 to 12 minutes on cold mornings. Call it 10 minutes. Winter in states like Minnesota, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Illinois runs roughly 150 cold mornings per year, where temperature falls below 32 degrees Fahrenheit. A typical passenger car or light truck consumes approximately 0.2 to 0.3 gallons of fuel per hour at idle. At 10 minutes per cold start, that is 0.03 to 0.05 gallons per cold start. At 150 cold mornings, that is 4.5 to 7.5 gallons of fuel per year burned while your car sits completely still in your driveway. At $3.50 per gallon, that is $15 to $26 per year in direct fuel cost. That sounds small. Here is what it actually costs when you add the real damage. A set of piston rings for a typical V6 pickup costs between $400 and $800 in parts alone. Professional installation with machine work to correct cylinder wear runs between $1,200 and $2,800, depending on the engine. Catalytic converter replacement on a half-ton truck costs between $900 and $1,800 installed. An oxygen sensor that has been fouled from chronic cold idle enrichment costs $60 to $140 per sensor. Most modern vehicles have 2 to 4 of them. The fuel cost of cold idling is trivial. The downstream component damage is not. Boston mechanic Rachel Simmons, who runs an independent shop specializing in high-mileage vehicles, told Motor Age magazine something that stuck with me. "I can identify the chronic cold idlers in my shop without asking a single question. The combustion residue pattern on the spark plugs tells me. The oxygen sensor life tells me. The oil analysis tells me." These customers spend 2 to 3 times more on engine-related maintenance over the vehicle's life compared to customers who simply drive away gently from cold. They think they're protecting the engine. They're billing themselves for the privilege of destroying it slowly. What engineers and mechanics actually say. The engineering consensus on cold idling has been settled for decades inside the industry. The problem is that it never made it to your driveway. Here is what the people who actually build these engines say, on record. A Toyota powertrain engineer, speaking to Car and Driver in 2022, was direct. Modern Toyota engines are calibrated to run from cold under light load immediately after startup. The fastest path to operating temperature is gentle driving, not idling. We validate every engine in cold chambers at -40 degrees Fahrenheit. Drive-away performance is a primary calibration target. Volkswagen's published owner guidance for turbocharged engines states explicitly that prolonged idling before driving is not necessary or recommended for modern fuel-injected engines, and can in fact contribute to carbon buildup. On intake valves, General Motors training materials for dealer technicians, published internally in 2019 and reported on by Automotive News, identify extended cold idle as a contributing factor in premature intake valve carbon deposits on direct injection engines. That last point deserves more time. Direct injection, the technology found in most modern gasoline engines sold in America after 2010, sprays fuel directly into the combustion chamber. It bypasses the intake valve entirely. In port injection engines, fuel spray continuously washed carbon deposits off the back of intake valves. In direct injection engines, nothing washes those valves. Carbon from blow-by and exhaust gas recirculation builds up on the valve stems and valve seat faces over time. Cold idling accelerates this process dramatically. The elevated blow-by of a cold engine, combined with the low combustion temperatures that prevent the carbon from burning off naturally, creates the ideal conditions for carbon deposit formation. Seattle engine builder David Kim has performed intake valve cleaning on over 200 direct injection engines in the past 4 years. His observations align precisely with the engineering data. I see two distinct populations of direct injection engines in my shop. Engines from drivers who idle warm, and engines from drivers who drive gently from cold. The idlers come in with intake valve deposits that look like volcanic rock formations, half-inch thick, hard as ceramic. The other group comes in looking almost clean. Same engine family, same mileage, completely different internal condition. The only variable is warm-up habit. Same engine, same mileage, completely different internal condition. If that does not change how you think about your driveway warm-up routine, the cost analysis at the end of this video will. The subscribe brake plus your car is lying to you. Before we go further, tap that subscribe button. This channel digs into the habits and myths that cost drivers thousands of dollars because the industry profits from your confusion. Every video is built on engineering data, real mechanic testimony, and the kind of cost analysis that dealers and manufacturers never want you running yourself. Now let me destroy one more piece of conventional wisdom that keeps this myth alive: the temperature gauge. Drivers watch the temperature needle and assume it represents what is happening inside the engine. It does not. The coolant temperature sensor reads the coolant temperature at a specific point in the cooling circuit. It is not reading oil temperature. It is not reading cylinder wall temperature. It is not reading intake manifold temperature. On a cold morning, coolant temperature reaches the midpoint of the gauge, what most drivers interpret as normal operating temperature, in approximately 4 to 7 minutes of driving. Oil temperature takes significantly longer, typically 15 to 20 minutes of driving, to reach the 200-degree plus range where it flows correctly and provides full film strength. The gauge tells you the coolant is warm. The engine is not fully warm. These are two different things, and confusing them is exactly how the warm-up myth survives. You watch the needle reach the middle. You feel like the engine is ready. You drive confidently, but the oil is still cold, thick, and compromised. The cylinder walls are still below operating temperature. Blow-by is still elevated. The damage is still occurring. The gauge lied to you, or more accurately, you asked it a question it cannot answer. How to actually protect a cold engine. Here is what the same engineers who told you not to idle will actually recommend, because there is a right way to handle cold starts, and it is simpler than 10 minutes of driveway time. Step 1. Start the engine. 30 seconds, no more. That 30 seconds accomplishes two things. It allows oil pressure to build from zero to operating idle pressure. It allows the oil pump to push oil from the pan through the main galleries to the primary bearing surfaces. 30 seconds is enough. 8 minutes is not better. It is destructive. Step 2. Drive away immediately, but gently. Gently means below 2,000 RPM for the first 5 minutes. It means no aggressive acceleration. It means no hard braking. It means treating the throttle like it costs you money, because at a cold start, it does. Why does gentle driving warm the engine faster than idling? Because combustion load. When the engine is under light driving load, combustion pressure is meaningfully higher than at idle. That pressure transfers heat into the cylinder walls, the pistons, and ultimately into the oil far faster than the minimal combustion events of idle. The oil circulates through every passage in the engine, picking up heat from the block, the cylinder head, the bearings. It reaches operating temperature in 8 to 12 minutes of gentle driving. An idling engine takes 25 to 35 minutes to reach oil operating temperature. A gently driven engine takes 8 to 12. You warm the engine faster by driving it than by sitting still. Phoenix mechanic Carlos Reyes, who has maintained fleet vehicles in the desert Southwest for 18 years, put it in the simplest terms possible. I tell every fleet driver the same thing every winter when they get transferred up north. Start it, count to 30, drive like you're carrying a birthday cake. 3 miles later, your engine is warmer than it would have been after 10 minutes of idling, and your intake valves look like new at 200,000 miles instead of like lava rock at 80,000. Step 3. Use full synthetic oil rated for cold weather operation. 0-weight or 5-weight synthetic oils like 0W20 or 0W30 flow significantly faster than conventional oil at cold temperatures. A 0W20 synthetic reaches primary bearing surfaces in 2 to 3 seconds at 0 degrees Fahrenheit. A conventional 10W30 oil can take 8 to 12 seconds at the same temperature. The dry start window The period of metal-to-metal contact at startup shrinks dramatically with the right oil. Step 4. If you park outside in extreme cold below 0 degrees Fahrenheit consistently, consider a block heater. A block heater plugged in for 2 to 3 hours before startup raises coolant and block temperature to approximately 80 to 100 degrees Fahrenheit before you ever turn the key. Oil circulates faster, blow-by is reduced, fuel enrichment is reduced, cold start wear drops to near zero. Block heaters cost $40 to $120 installed. They are the only cold start solution that genuinely works from an engineering standpoint. Special cases diesels, turbos, and EVs. Before we close the book on warm-up myths, 3 categories of vehicles deserve their own treatment because the rules shift in specific ways. Diesel engines. Modern common rail diesel engines share the same fundamental physics as gasoline engines. They do not need extended idling. However, diesel engines do have one unique characteristic that matters in extreme cold. Diesel fuel itself can gel or cloud at temperatures below approximately 10 to 15 degrees Fahrenheit, depending on the blend. If you are in Alaska, northern Minnesota, or Canada, running conventional diesel in temperatures below zero, the fuel delivery concern is real. This is managed with winter blend diesel fuel, fuel additives, or fuel heaters, not by idling the engine. The engine warm-up advice remains the same: 30 seconds, then drive gently. But use the correct winter fuel for your climate. A diesel particulate filter, the emissions component found on all modern diesel trucks, also requires periodic regeneration cycles. These cycles require the engine and exhaust system to reach operating temperature. Extended cold idling actually interferes with DPF regeneration by keeping exhaust temperature too low. Diesel owners who idle chronically in cold weather frequently end up with clogged DPFs requiring forced regeneration or replacement. A new DPF on a 3/4-ton diesel truck costs between $1,200 and $3,500 installed. Turbocharged engines. Turbocharged engines have one legitimate special consideration, and it applies at shutdown, not startup. Turbochargers spin at speeds between 100,000 and 250,000 RPM on boosted engines. The bearing that supports the turbine shaft is lubricated by engine oil under pressure. When you shut the engine off after hard driving, oil pressure drops to zero. If the turbocharger is still hot from operation, that heat soaks into the oil trapped in the bearing. The oil cooks into carbon deposits that restrict flow and wear the bearing. The solution is not to idle before driving. It is to avoid hard driving in the last mile before you park. Let the turbocharger cool down under light load before shutdown. Many modern turbocharged vehicles include a turbo timer function in the ECU specifically for this purpose. Cold start idling does not protect a turbocharger. Gentle driving before shutdown does. Electric vehicles. Do not confuse engine warm-up with cabin conditioning. An EV has no engine to warm up. What it does have is a battery pack that loses capacity in cold temperatures and a cabin that is cold. Modern EVs are designed to preheat the battery and cabin while still plugged into shore power. This is the correct protocol, and it is entirely different from engine warm-up. If you are preconditioning your EV while plugged in, you are not hurting it. You are using the system exactly as the engineers designed it. The battery warms from grid power. Your range is preserved. The cost analysis that changes everything. Let me put the real numbers on the table, the way they never appear in tire shop conversations or dealership service writers' recommendations. Driver A idles their engine for 10 minutes, every cold morning, for 10 years of winter driving, 150 cold mornings per year, 1,500 total cold idle events over a decade. Direct fuel cost at current prices. Approximately $150 to $260 in fuel burned while stationary. Engine carbon cleaning service on a direct injection engine, typically $400 to $800, required at high frequency for chronic cold idlers. Call it one cleaning at $600. Oxygen sensor replacement, 2 sensors at $100 each, $200. Catalytic converter replacement, one event over the decade in a chronic idler scenario. Average cost on a half-ton truck, $1,400. Piston ring wear contribution to overall engine rebuild or high-mileage maintenance, Conservative estimate of additional cost attributable to cold idle wear over a decade, $800 to $1,200. Total 10-year cost of the warm-up habit, $3,150 to $3,460. Driver B starts the engine, waits 30 seconds, drives gently for 5 minutes every cold morning. Total 10-year cost attributable to cold start habits beyond normal wear, near zero. The habit that feels like responsible ownership costs $3,000 more over a decade than doing nothing except driving away gently. And that calculation does not include the vehicle that needs an early engine rebuild, the truck that develops a misfire at 120,000 miles from carbon deposits, or the turbo that fails from heat soak because the owner idled cold and then drove hard immediately. The bottom line. Let me bring this full circle. The warm-up habit survived because it was once correct. Carbureted engines before 1980 genuinely needed time before driving. That advice made sense for those vehicles. The mechanics who gave it were not wrong for their era. But that era ended over 40 years ago. The carburetor is gone, the ECU is not, the fuel injector is not, the sensors that calibrate fuel delivery in real time to cold cylinder walls are not. Your modern engine does not idle its way to health on a cold morning. It circulates cold, thick oil at low pressure, while fuel washes lubrication off cylinder walls. Blow-by contaminates your oil charge, carbon builds on your intake valves, and your catalytic converter absorbs $1,000 of slow damage, one idle at a time. 30 seconds. Drive gently. That is the engineering answer. That is what the people who built your engine designed it to do. The most expensive thing you can do to a modern engine on a cold morning is exactly what your father taught you and what his father taught him. Let it warm up. Now you know why that advice died with the carburetor and why following it today is costing you thousands.